I was fascinated by the Michael Vick appearance on Tyreek Hill's podcast. It needed to be said. Now, look, there was plenty that still needed to be said that wasn't said. That irony is not lost on me, and it makes it even funnier because there will be times that Tyreek Hill reminds the audience and the guest and his co-host, well, the podcast is called It Needed to Be Said, so go ahead and say what you have to say. But there are still some things that aren't said. Some things related to Hill that aren't said. Some things related to Mike Vick that weren't said. All 84 minutes today, and I listened to the whole thing, the word dogfighting was never mentioned. And I thought they were never going to even address the 2-year donut hole in Vick's career and his life when he was in prison for admitting to dogfighting, gambling on dogfighting, federal charges, also admitted to participating in the killing of dogs that were deemed unfit to fight. And still, I don't understand how he avoided an indictment in Virginia other than the prosecutor there, who I think would have given Vick a pass on everything if the feds hadn't gotten involved. Remember him, Gerald Poindexter? I think he just didn't. That's my opinion. My opinion is he didn't want to get an indictment. That's my opinion. I don't know what the facts are. I don't know if he truly didn't want to do it, but we hear all the time, prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich if he wants to. The flip side of that's also true. If a prosecutor doesn't want to get an indictment, prosecutor knows how to not get that indictment. But what struck me was the candor that Vick displayed when he eventually talked about, in general terms, the fact that his career in Atlanta came to an end and he had to start again somewhere else. And everybody involved tiptoed around the elephant in the room, the dogfighting situation. I wish there had been more candor about that. We all know, well, that's my concern. We, those of us who lived it, covered it, were football fans when it happened, we know what it was. But you got a whole generation of kids coming up now that don't know, without Googling it, why Mike Vick had 2 years where he didn't play. And I think there's a value in explaining what it was that he did. And I was impressed by his willingness to come out and say, and he was conflicted as he was saying it, I wish I had someone who was a father figure. And I did, but I needed someone to tell me what this could do to my life and my career. There was one person, but I won't name who that was. That's what he said. So he wanted someone to tell him he was doing wrong, but someone did tell him he was doing wrong, and he ignored that person. I think the truth is he wasn't going to listen to anybody. 43-year-old Mike Vick would listen. Mike Vick from 16 years ago wasn't going to listen. Mike Vick from 22 years ago wasn't going to listen. And this was a 6-year ordeal. I remember I used to get very upset when someone would refer to what Mike Vick did as a mistake. It was never a mistake. It was a 6-year lifestyle. And I remember all the arguments that he didn't know it was wrong because it was culturally accepted where he grew up. I don't buy that either. At some point, Mike Vick knew he was doing wrong. And at some point, Mike Vick wasn't listening to those who tried to tell him he was doing wrong. He was determined to keep doing what he was doing, and he believed he wasn't going to get caught. And I think the story that impacted me the most was Vick explaining that he bought a Maybach after he got his second contract from the Falcons, got pulled over because the police officer just needed to know what kind of car it was. And Vick thought, I got to get rid of this car. This is too much attention. He knew. He knew that this house of cards could collapse. He just assumed there would never be a sufficient gust of wind to knock it down. He thought he was impervious to that. He thought he would get away with it because he did for 6 years. He did. The Falcons never showed the slightest curiosity about this rural property he had in Virginia that he would go to all the time. And it wasn't like it was underground tunnels that were built to hide the dogfighting operation. It was all out there. Now, they painted the buildings black, but that only gets you so far. It's a fascinating chapter in NFL history. And it was fascinating to me to hear Mike Vick talk about it, especially because I felt like Tyreek Hill and his co-host didn't even want to talk about it. And they could have drawn so much more out of him on it needed to be said. But for whatever reason, they didn't want to go there. They thought the Falcons should have brought Vick back the moment he got out of prison, give him a second chance, let bygones be bygones, forget what happened, and move on. Vick thought that when he was that age. He now understands why that couldn't happen. And there's a valuable conversation to be had between Vick and Tyreek Hill. Because Tyreek Hill now, he's older than Vick was when Vick got in trouble, but he's still in that younger mindset that may not understand the connections between actions and consequences, as evidenced by what happened since that podcast was recorded. The podcast was recorded during the offseason program. The Father's Day incident that Tyreek Hill is being investigated by the NFL and criminal authorities for, that happened afterward. But there's a maturity to Mike Vick now, and he could be such a valuable ambassador to players who need to hear from someone they grew up idolizing. Now, look, we're getting toward the end of the generation that grew up idolizing Mike Vick, but it would be great to find a way by the league, by Fox, or by Vick himself to really help be that voice that can cut through the noise. But you know what the reality may be? When you have someone who is as big of a star as Vick was, he ain't going to listen. He's just not going to listen. Mike Vick, age 27, would tell Mike Vick, age 43, to get out of my face and leave me alone. I know what I'm doing. I don't need your advice. If 43, if that's the one person who told Mike Vick how he was going to screw up his life, if there was a Back to the Future angle here where it was 43-year-old Mike Vick travels back in time in a Maybach going 88 miles per hour with 1.21 gigawatts of electricity from a lightning strike. If it's 43-year-old Mike Vick that says to 26-year-old Mike Vick, stop it, you're going to screw up your life. 26-year-old Mike Vick tell him to get back in that Maybach and go back 88 miles an hour and get yourself a lightning strike and leave me alone because I'm fine. I don't need your advice. It's fascinating to me because it was such a huge story at the time. And I don't think the passage of time justifies forgetting that it ever happened. And I really felt like, even though there was an 84-minute podcast interview and it did eventually come up, I felt like the host of the podcast didn't want to get into it. Not the way that maybe he could have or should have. Because I think Vick, for whatever reason, was feeling like he was ready to bare his soul a little bit more than he ultimately did. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.